They say silence is golden, but in corporate America silence is suspicious. Makes people nervous. They want you loud, animated, performing your productivity like a circus act. Well, I was quiet. I am quiet. And that silence just cost Connor Hayes everything his father built. I'm Maya Keller. For 18 years I was the contract architect at Vanguard Systems, a data infrastructure company that went from a basement operation to a billion-dollar empire. I wasn't the face of the company. I wasn't on the keynote stages or the magazine covers. I was the foundation, the steel beams nobody sees but everyone relies on. While the sales team was out golfing with clients and the executive suite was busy inhaling their own press releases, I was in a windowless office on the third floor, building legal frameworks so airtight they could survive a nuclear audit. I drafted every licensing agreement, every partnership clause, every territorial exclusivity provision that turned Vanguard from a regional player into a global powerhouse. 18 years ago, this company wasn't housed in a gleaming chrome tower in Austin. It was 4 people crammed into a converted garage that reeked of motor oil and ambition. The founder, Gerald Hayes, was a brilliant engineer with the social skills of a cactus. He knew his distributed server technology was revolutionary, but he had no clue how to monetize it without getting legally destroyed. That's where I came in. Fresh out of law school, hungry, idealistic, stupid enough to accept equity instead of a competitive salary. Gerald paced that garage like a caged animal, chain-smoking unfiltered cigarettes, while I sat on a metal folding chair with my laptop balanced on a cardboard box. Maya, he'd bark, ash falling onto my keyboard. I need this locked down. I want contracts so tight that if someone even dreams about stealing our tech, they wake up owing us money. So I built it. I wove together licensing provisions, IP protections, and jurisdictional clauses like I was crafting a medieval suit of armor. Every clause had a purpose. Every comma was deliberate. I created what we called the Master Framework Agreement, the MFA, a living document that would govern every partnership Vanguard ever entered. For 18 years I maintained that framework. I updated it, patched it, evolved it as the company grew. Gerald trusted me completely. He never questioned my work. He understood something most executives don't. The people who build the machinery are more valuable than the people who pose next to it. Gerald died last year. Stroke. He was 73, ornery until the end, and probably argued with the Grim Reaper about the terms of his departure. The company passed to his son Connor Hayes, and that's when everything started smelling like a dumpster fire soaked in cologne. Connor is 34. He has an MBA from a school that values networking over knowledge, teeth so white they could guide ships to shore, and the kind of confidence that only comes from never experiencing real consequences. He waltzed into the CO office wearing $1,000 sneakers and carrying a matcha latte, acting like he'd earned the throne through merit instead of genetics. His first all-hands meeting was a TED Talk without the substance. He threw around words like disruption, and paradigm shift, and vertical integration. He talked about making Vanguard sexier and more dynamic. He looked at the company his father built, the company I had legally fortified, and saw it as a playground for his ego. He looked at me, the woman in the corner with the reading glasses and the 3-ring binders, and he saw dead weight. He saw his father's era. He saw something that needed to be optimized. I remember the first strategy meeting under Connor's regime. We were discussing our licensing agreements with our Asian partners, a delicate web of contracts that generated 40% of our revenue. These weren't simple documents. They were intricate ecosystems where one wrong move could trigger cascading defaults across 3 continents. I was trying to explain why we couldn't just streamline the approval process in South Korea without renegotiating the master terms, when Connor interrupted me. He wasn't even looking at me. He was scrolling through his phone. Maya, he said, not looking up, you're getting lost in the weeds again. We need to move faster. All this legal red tape is why we're not growing at 30% year over year. I lowered my reading glasses. Connor, we're not growing at 30% because the market is maturing. We're growing at 12%, which is exceptional for our sector. If we ignore these licensing protocols, we'll trigger penalty clauses that will cost us. Cost. He waved his hand dismissively. That's all you talk about. What about opportunity cost? What about being bold? The room went silent. The other executives, people I'd worked alongside for over a decade, studied their laptops. Nobody defended the woman who had saved their departments from legal disasters more times than they could count. Being bold without being careful is just being reckless, I said quietly. Connor finally looked at me. His smile didn't reach his eyes. And being careful without vision is just being scared. That was the moment. That was when I knew he was going to try to get rid of me. You develop an instinct for these things after 18 years. You can smell the setup before it happens. Over the next 3 months, Connor systematically marginalized me. He stopped inviting me to key meetings. He hired a chief strategy officer, some guy named Brendan who'd worked at 3 failed startups and somehow spun that into expertise. Brendan was loud, charismatic, and spectacularly ignorant about contract law. They started making decisions without consulting me. Small ones at first, then bigger ones. They approved a partnership with a Brazilian firm without checking if it violated our exclusivity agreement with our South American distributor. It did. I had to spend 2 weeks and $30,000 in legal fees cleaning up that mess. Did I get credit? No. Did I get an apology? No. I got a passive-aggressive email from Connor suggesting I needed to communicate better with the broader team. I organized for war. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind. The kind that happens in spreadsheets and archived email chains. I went back to my office, that same windowless box I'd occupied for 18 years, and I started pulling files. I retrieved the original founding documents, the ones from the garage days. I pulled up every amendment, every addendum, every schedule we'd added to the master framework agreement over the years. And I looked for the thread I'd sewn into the fabric back in 2006. See, Gerald was paranoid. Brilliantly, usefully paranoid. In those early days he was terrified of being pushed out by investors or board members. He'd seen too many founders lose their own companies. So when I drafted the original MFA, he asked me to include a safeguard. Maya, he'd said, stubbing out a cigarette in an empty soda can, what happens if someday I'm not here and some idiot tries to sell off pieces of this company without understanding what they're doing? We could include a co-signature requirement, I suggested. Any amendment that alters the core IP licensing structure requires sign-off from both the founding executive and the chief legal architect. Both signatures. Both in wet ink. Wet ink. Gerald raised an eyebrow. Physical signatures. Not digital. Harder to forge, harder to fake, and impossible to claim it was automated. He loved it. We called it Clause 7C, the sovereignty provision. It was buried on page 38 of the original MFA, in the definitions section where nobody ever looks. It stated clearly, any modification to territorial licensing rights, any change to IP exclusivity provisions, any amendment affecting revenue-sharing structures required physical signatures from both Gerald Hayes, or his designated successor, and the chief legal architect. For 18 years that clause sat dormant. Every time we made a major change, Gerald and I both signed. When we went digital in 2015, we still printed out the signature pages and signed them in wet ink, then scanned them back in. Gerald insisted. But Gerald was dead now. And Connor had no idea the clause existed. In 2019 we did a massive international expansion. We opened licensing agreements in 14 new countries. It was our biggest growth period and it was complicated. The amendment package was 300 pages long. Connor's father was already sick by then, dealing with the cancer that would eventually weaken him enough for the stroke to finish the job. Everyone was in a hurry. The lawyers said digital signatures were industry standard. Legally binding, faster. Gerald was in a hospital bed in Seattle. I was in Austin. We both signed digitally through DocuSign. It was efficient. It was modern. It was completely invalid under Clause 7C. I knew it at the time. I remember hovering my cursor over the sign button and feeling a tiny flutter of hesitation. But Gerald was dying, the company needed the revenue, and I was loyal. I was part of the team. Why would I sabotage my own company? Except it wasn't sabotage. It was insurance. And insurance only matters when something goes wrong. The 2019 International Licensing Amendment, the ILA, was the foundation of Vanguard's current revenue model. 68% of the company's income came from licenses governed by that document. If the ILA was invalid, if it was void from inception, then every dollar collected under it was legally questionable. And Connor was about to fire me. I didn't have to wait long. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon. Wednesday is the coward's choice for terminations. Monday is too aggressive, Friday is too risky for optics. Tuesday is amateur hour. Wednesday is when you fire someone and hope they're too demoralized by midweek to make a scene. Maya, can you come down to conference room B? It was Alicia, the HR director, a woman in her late 20s who wore pastel blazers and spoke exclusively in LinkedIn motivational quotes. On my way, I said. I didn't bring anything. No notebook, no laptop, nothing. I'd already copied everything I needed to 3 encrypted drives hidden in my apartment. I walked down the hallway I'd walked down thousands of times, past the server room I'd authorized the budget for, past the wall of partnership plaques I'd negotiated. I walked into conference room B. The blinds were drawn. That's always the tell. If they're firing you, they don't want witnesses. Connor was there, leaning against the window looking at his phone. He was wearing designer jeans and a cashmere hoodie. Business casual for someone who'd never done any actual business. Alicia sat at the table, clutching a folder like it might explode. She looked nervous. Good. Have a seat, Maya, Alicia said. I sat. I folded my hands on the table. Am I being terminated? I asked. No point dancing around it. Alicia blinked. She'd prepared a script. I just skipped to the ending. We're undergoing a structural reorganization, she began. The leadership team has been evaluating operational efficiency across all departments and... So yes, I interrupted. You're firing me. Connor finally looked up from his phone. Let's not be dramatic, Maya. Your role is being eliminated. It's not personal. The legal function is being outsourced to a firm that specializes in tech law. It's more cost-effective. Cost-effective, I repeated. You're outsourcing 18 years of institutional knowledge to save... What, my salary and benefits? It's about modernization, Connor said. The firm we're hiring uses AI-assisted contract review. They can process documents in hours instead of weeks. Your approach, while thorough, is just too slow for where we're going. I almost laughed. AI reviewing my contracts. Good luck teaching a language model to understand the nuance of cascading indemnity clauses across non-reciprocal jurisdictions. What's my severance? I asked. Alicia slid the folder across the table. 3 weeks for every year of service, capped at 1 year. Plus 6 months of continued health insurance. We're also offering outplacement services. 54 weeks, I calculated. For 18 years. It's a generous package, Connor said. Industry standard. And my equity? I asked. Standard vesting schedule applies. Anything unvested is forfeited upon termination. I'd been promised equity back in the garage days. Over the years, as the company grew, that equity had been diluted, restructured, repackaged. I had shares, but they were tied to complex vesting schedules that nobody except me and Gerald had ever fully understood. I need a copy of my original employment agreement, I said. The one from 2006. And a copy of this termination letter. Why? Connor asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. For my records. State unemployment requires documentation of original hire date for benefit calculations. It was bureaucratic nonsense, but bureaucracy is a foreign language to people like Connor. They fear it because they don't understand it. Fine, Connor said. Alicia, get her the paperwork. Let's wrap this up. I have a lunch meeting. Alicia left the room. Connor and I sat in silence. The air conditioning hummed. I could hear his Apple Watch buzzing with notifications. You think this is a mistake, Connor finally said. It wasn't a question. I think you're making a decision based on incomplete information, I replied. But it's your company now. Damn right it is, he said. Dad built something incredible, but he was too conservative. Too risk-averse. We could be twice as big if we were willing to move faster and break things. Break things, I echoed. That's a great philosophy until you realize some things once broken can't be fixed. Alicia returned with a thin stack of papers. My 2006 employment agreement and the termination letter, freshly printed and signed by Connor. Reason for termination. Position elimination due to operational restructuring. Perfect. I took the papers. I didn't sign their severance agreement. I need 48 hours to review this, I said, tapping the severance packet. Standard procedure. It's in your own document, clause 9. I wrote it. Alicia looked at Connor. Connor shrugged. Whatever. Take the weekend. Sign it, send it back. Your access is already deactivated. I stood up. I smoothed my blouse. I looked Connor in the eye. Good luck with the modernization, I said. I walked out. I didn't pack a box. Didn't say goodbye to anyone. I just walked straight to the elevator, rode it down to the parking garage, got into my Honda Accord and drove home. My heart was hammering, not from fear but from anticipation. Because clutched in my hand was proof. Proof that Connor Hayes had just fired me without cause, and proof that I had legal rights he didn't know existed. That night, I sat at my dining room table with a bottle of Pinot Grigio and 3 encrypted external drives. My apartment is small, efficient, quiet. No pets, no roommates. Just me and my plants and my meticulously organized filing system. I pulled up the 2006 employment agreement. There it was in Section 12, Benefits and Equity Provisions. Asterisk, in the event of involuntary termination without cause, employee shall retain a perpetual royalty interest of 1.8% of gross international licensing revenue, calculated retroactively from the date of first international deployment, vesting immediately upon termination. Gerald had insisted on that clause. I thought he was being paranoid. Turns out he was being prophetic. 1.8% of international licensing revenue. Our international revenue since 2019 totaled approximately $940 million. 1.8% of that was $16.92 million. Plus future royalties on every dollar we made abroad, which was projected to be another $200 million annually. But that was just my personal payday. The real bomb was in the Master Framework Agreement. I pulled up the original MFA from 2006 and the 2019 International Licensing Amendment side by side. I compared the signature pages. The 2019 ILA showed digital signatures. Gerald Hayes signed via DocuSign. Maya Keller signed via DocuSign. But Clause 7C of the original MFA was explicit. Wet ink signatures required for any amendment affecting territorial licensing. No wet ink meant the amendment was void ab initio. Void from the beginning. It never legally existed. Which meant Vanguard had been collecting international licensing fees for 5 years under an invalid contract. Every partnership in Europe, Asia, South America, all of it built on legal quicksand. I sipped my wine. Tasted like vindication. Connor didn't know about Clause 7C. Why would he? He'd never read the original MFA. He'd inherited the company, not the knowledge. I spent the weekend building my case. I compiled 3 dossiers. Dossier 1, the law, contains the original MFA with Clause 7C highlighted, the 2019 ILA showing only digital signatures, and a legal brief explaining why the ILA is invalid. Dossier 2, the damage, contains a spreadsheet of every international contract signed under the ILA, every dollar collected, every partner who would have legal grounds to sue for breach of contract once they realized they'd been licensing technology under false pretenses. Dossier 3, the bill, contains my 2006 employment agreement with the royalty clause highlighted, plus Connor's termination letter stating I was fired without cause. I didn't contact Connor. I didn't call the company's lawyers. I waited. Predators don't chase prey. They let prey make mistakes. On Monday morning I woke up to a press release. Vanguard Systems had just announced a $300 million licensing deal with a European consortium called TechBridge Collective. It was Connor's crown jewel, his proof that he was a capable CEO, his validation. The press release included a quote from Connor. Asterisk, this partnership represents Vanguard's commitment to global innovation and seamless technological integration. Our robust legal frameworks ensure that every partnership is built on solid ground. Solid ground. That was rich. I opened my laptop and drafted an email. I didn't send it to Vanguard. I sent it to the General Counsel of TechBridge Collective, a man named Dieter Schulman. I'd met him once at a trade conference in Munich. He was meticulous, humorless, and allergic to legal risk. Subject: urgent question regarding Clause 7C/Vanguard Licensing Authority. Dear Dieter. Asterisk, congratulations on your partnership with Vanguard Systems. I hope this message finds you well. Asterisk. Asterisk, I am writing as the original architect of Vanguard's Master Framework Agreement. As I am no longer with the company as of last week, I am organizing my files and noticed a potential compliance issue that may affect your partnership. Asterisk. Asterisk, could you please verify whether the 2019 International Licensing Amendment referenced in your contract contains the required wet ink countersignatures specified under Clause 7C of the founding MFA? My records indicate that this amendment was executed via digital signature only, which would technically render it void ab initio under the original terms. Asterisk. I'm certain this is just an administrative oversight, but given the strict liability standards in EU IP law, I thought a colleague should give you a heads up. Asterisk, best regards. Maya Keller. Asterisk. I hit send. Then I poured myself coffee and waited. It didn't take long. 3 hours later my phone rang. It was an Austin area code I didn't recognize. Hello. Maya Keller? The voice was clipped, tense. Speaking. This is Leonard Ashford, General Counsel for Vanguard Systems. We need to talk. Now. I'm sorry, Leonard, I don't work for Vanguard anymore. If you need legal consultation, my hourly rate is... Cut the shit, Maya. What did you send to TechBridge? I sent a professional courtesy to a former colleague. Is there a problem? You know damn well there's a problem. Schulman is threatening to pull out of the deal. He's talking about fraudulent inducement. Do you understand what you've done? I asked a clarifying question about signatures. How is that fraudulent? You know the ILA is valid. You signed it. Gerald signed it. Digital signatures are legally binding. Under standard contract law, yes, I interrupted. But not under Clause 7C. Have you read Clause 7C, Leonard? Silence. I'll take that as a no, I continued. You should read it. Page 38 of the original MFA. Then you should look at your signature pages from 2019. Then you should call me back with a better attitude. I hung up. My phone exploded. Calls from Leonard. Calls from Connor. Texts, emails, increasingly frantic messages. I ignored all of them. I went to the gym, did yoga, came home and made a salad. At 7 p.m. my phone buzzed with a text from Connor. Asterisk, we need to meet. Tomorrow. 9 a.m. My office. This is fixable. Asterisk. I replied. Asterisk, I no longer have access to your office. My badge was deactivated. If you'd like to meet, I'm available at the Stonewood Coffee House on West 6th Street. 10 a.m. works for me. Asterisk. Public place. Neutral territory. Witnesses. The next morning I arrived at Stonewood at 9:45. I ordered a latte and found a table by the window. I brought one folder with me, Dossier 3. The bill. Connor arrived at 10:02, flanked by Leonard Ashford and another lawyer I didn't recognize. Connor looked like he hadn't slept. His designer stubble looked less calculated, casual, and more genuinely distressed. They sat down. Nobody ordered coffee. Hiya, Connor began, trying for conciliatory but landing on condescending. There's been a misunderstanding. Has there? The ILA is valid. Leonard's reviewed it. Digital signatures are legally binding in Texas and federally under assign. This whole thing with TechBridge is just a misreading of an outdated clause. Clause 7C isn't outdated, I said calmly. It's in the current MFA. You've never amended it. And it explicitly requires wet ink signatures for territorial licensing amendments. Leonard leaned forward. Even if we accept your interpretation, which we don't, the doctrine of equitable estoppel would apply. The company acted as if the ILA was valid. Partners relied on it. Revenue was collected and reported. No court would void 5 years of operations over a technicality. It's not a technicality, I said. It's a written requirement in the binding contract. And estoppel doesn't apply when one party was unaware of the defect. Do you think your international partners knew the amendment was invalid? Do you think the SEC knew you were reporting revenue under a void contract? The third lawyer, a woman with severe bangs, spoke up. Are you threatening to report this to the SEC? I'm not threatening anything, I said. I sent a question to a colleague. He responded appropriately by putting the deal on hold. What you do next is up to you. Connor slammed his hand on the table. The coffee shop went quiet. People stared. What do you want, Maya? Connor hissed. Money? Fine. Name a number. We'll settle this quietly. I don't want a settlement, I said. I want what I'm owed. Under my 2006 employment contract, Section 12, I'm entitled to 1.8% of all international licensing revenue, retroactive and ongoing, upon involuntary termination without cause. I slid dossier 3 across the table. Leonard opened it. His face went gray as he read my original employment agreement. This is 18 years old, Leonard said weakly. Employment law has changed. This wouldn't hold up. It's a signed contract, I said. Connor's father signed it. Connor just triggered it by firing me without cause. The termination letter is in the folder. You'll note Connor's signature. Connor was reading over Leonard's shoulder. I watched the math happen in his real time. 1.8% of $940 million. $16.92 million. Plus future royalties. This is extortion, Connor said. No, it's a contract. One your father wrote because he was smarter than you. We'll fight this, Connor said. We'll argue you were fired for cause. Incompetence. Insubordination. Your termination letter says otherwise. I pointed to the document. Position elimination due to restructuring. You can't change it now just because you don't like the price tag. The woman with severe bangs closed her laptop. She's right. If we try to change the stated reason now, it's retaliation. The Department of Labor would destroy us. Connor looked like he wanted to flip the table. Instead he stood up. This isn't over. Actually, I said, it is. You have two choices. Pay me what I'm contractually owed, and I'll sign the wet ink validation for the 2019 I. That saves your TechBridge deal and every other international partnership. Or don't pay me and I send my analysis to every single one of your partners, plus the SEC, explaining why they've been operating under an invalid contract. How much? Connor asked through gritted teeth. $16.92 million for past royalties. Plus 1.8% of future international revenue in perpetuity. Plus a $3 million consulting fee to execute the wet ink retroactive validation. $20 million, Connor said flatly. Roughly. Plus ongoing royalties. Think of it as the cost of not reading your own contracts. Leonard was frantically typing on his phone. We need board approval for a payment this size. Then get it, I said. TechBridge wants answers by end of week. The longer you wait, the more partners start asking questions. I stood up. I'll be at home. You have my email. Send me a formal offer letter, or send me nothing and watch your stock price collapse. Your choice. I walked out of the coffee shop into the Texas heat. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From adrenaline. From the pure, intoxicating rush of watching someone realize they've been outplayed. The offer came Thursday afternoon. A formal settlement agreement drafted by an army of lawyers, probably costing $50,000 in billable hours just to write. The terms: $19.92 million lump sum payment. 1.8% perpetual royalty on future international revenue, paid quarterly. $3 million consulting fee. In exchange, I would execute wet ink signatures on the retroactive validation documents for the 2019 IA, sign a mutual non-disparagement agreement, and release all claims. There was also a personal apology letter from Connor Hayes, signed in wet ink, acknowledging that my termination was an error in strategic judgment, and thanking me for 18 years of invaluable service. I had my own lawyer review it. She was a shark named Angela Reeves who charged $800 an hour and smiled like she ate insurance adjusters for breakfast. This is airtight, Angela said. They're paying you what you're owed and they're getting the validation they need. It's clean. Any traps? None I can see. The non-disparagement is mutual and reasonable. The release is standard. The royalty payment structure is clear. Maya, you just became very, very wealthy. I signed the agreement on Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, the wire transfer hit my account. $22.92 million. I drove to Vanguard's headquarters one last time. I had to sign the physical validation documents in person with witnesses, to make it legally bulletproof. Connor wasn't there. Couldn't face me apparently. It was just Leonard, a notary public, and two witnesses from the executive team who looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. I signed the wet ink validation on the 2019 ILA. I signed the settlement agreement. I signed the non-disparagement clause. Pleasure doing business with you, Leonard, I said, capping my pen. He didn't respond. He just stared at the documents like they were a crime scene. I walked out of Vanguard Systems for the last time. I got into my Honda Accord and I sat there in the parking lot for a moment. $22 million. Plus royalties. Plus the knowledge that I just taught Connor Hayes the most expensive lesson of his life. I didn't go home. I drove to a small wine bar downtown called the Barrel Room. It was 4 p.m. on a Friday and the place was empty except for the bartender, a guy named Felix who looked like he'd seen everything twice. Hiya, Felix raised an eyebrow. Day drinking? That's not like you. Special occasion, I said, sliding onto his stool. I just retired. Retired? You're what, 45? 43. And yes, retired. Must have been some severance package. You could say that. I smiled. Give me your best champagne. The real stuff. He poured me a glass of Veuve Clicquot. I raced it to the empty bar. To Gerald Hayes, I toasted. For being paranoid enough to protect the woman who protected him. I took a sip. Tasted like freedom. I thought about Connor, probably in his office right now, explaining to the board why $23 million just disappeared from the cash reserves. I thought about Brendan, the chief strategy officer, realizing that all his move fast and break things philosophy had just broken the one thing that couldn't be fixed without me. I thought about Clause 7C sitting dormant for 18 years, waiting for exactly this moment. The beautiful thing about being an architect is that you think in terms of decades, not quarters. You build in fail-safes. You create redundancies. You plan for the day when the people in charge forget why the building is still standing. My phone buzzed. A LinkedIn notification. Connor Hayes had posted an update. Asterisk, excited to announce Vanguard's continued partnership with TechBridge Collective. Strategic realignment complete. Onward and upward. Strategic realignment. That was one way to describe paying $23 million to the woman you fired for being too quiet. I finished my champagne. I left $100 bill on the bar. Keep the change, Felix. Outside, the sun was setting over Austin. The sky was orange and purple, the color of endings and beginnings. I had no plans. No meetings. No deadlines. No Connor Hayes telling me I was too slow, too careful, too quiet. I was quiet. I am quiet. But quiet doesn't mean weak. Quiet means I'm listening. Quiet means I'm thinking. Quiet means I'm 3 moves ahead while you're still trying to figure out the rules. I got into my car and pulled out my phone. I opened my banking app just to look at the number one more time. $22,920,000. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who just won a game that the other player didn't know they were playing. Alexa, I said to my car's speaker system, play Don't Stop Me Now by Queen. Freddie Mercury's voice filled the car as I pulled out of the parking lot, heading nowhere in particular and everywhere at once. Connor Hayes had fired me for being too quiet. He'd eliminated my position to save money and modernize. What he'd actually done was trigger a contractual trapdoor that had been waiting 18 years to open. He'd kicked out the architect who knew where all the load-bearing walls were. He'd removed the one person who understood that the empire wasn't built on technology. It was built on paper. On clauses. On signatures. On the quiet work of someone nobody bothered to appreciate until she was gone. My silence hadn't been weakness. It had been strategy. And now, driving through Austin with $23 million in the bank and champagne in my veins, I finally allowed myself to laugh. Not a polite laugh. A full, genuine, unrestrained laugh that echoed through the empty car. Connor thought he was pruning dead weight. What he'd actually done was cut the one rope holding the chandelier above his head. I'd spent 18 years building a fortress. And when they threw me out, I took the blueprints with me. Let them try to figure out how it all works now. Let Connor and his MBA buddies and his AI contract review tools try to navigate the labyrinth I built. I'd be in Tuscany. Or maybe the Greek islands. Or maybe just sitting in my apartment drinking wine and watching the royalty payments hit my account every quarter for the rest of my life. The devil isn't in the details. The devil is in Clause 7C, page 38, paragraph 3. And I'm the only one who remembered she was there. Connor Hayes had called me too quiet. He'd called me outdated. He called me dead weight. He should have called me by my proper title, the woman who owned the trap he just walked into. And now 18 years of silence had finally paid dividends. Loud and clear.